Welcome to LeaderIQ, where we share the stories of leaders in brand and retail so you can learn what led them to find success in their careers while giving you an intimate look at how they made foundational decisions along the way. This show is hosted by Guru Hariharan, who is the founder and CEO of CommerceIQ. Guru has spent most of his career working as a leader at companies like Amazon and eBay before becoming an entrepreneur himself. This podcast is brought to you by CommerceIQ, a company which Guru started in 2019 that has become the e-commerce operating system for brands like Logitech, Johnson & Johnson, Kellogg's, Mars, Duracell, and many more. If you're interested in learning more, check out commerceiq.ai. With that, let's get to the show. Today's guest is Sri Rajagopalan, Chief Omnichannel Commercial Officer at General Mills. This is such an exciting conversation we had. We had to record it over 2 different sessions, but Sri shared some of the lessons he's learned over the years throughout many amazing companies, from Frito-Lay to Johnson & Johnson to Revlon, and now at General Mills. I also encourage you, if you enjoyed this interview, to check out Sri's podcast, The CPG Guys. You can listen more at cpgguys.com. Without further ado, here is your host, Guru Hariharan and Sri Rajagopalan.
Hey Sri, it's wonderful to have you on our podcast. It feels like I am going to be interviewing a podcast expert yourself, and so I'm excited and also partly nervous because I need to get this right. Because you're a better expert in doing this than I am. So
expert, I don't know, Guru, but maverick, yes.
Great. So Sri Rajagopal, as you all know, is the Chief Omnichannel Customer Officer for General Mills for North America. It's just a pleasure to have you, Sri, on our call. We have followed you. I have followed you personally over the last few years, been in awe in terms of how you carry yourself and how you are developing your career and the careers of people around you. So very curious about a lot of things that we're going to go into, but really thank you for making time for coming over to the show.
Thank you, first of all. It's a pleasure to be here. Don't humble me. And I know you've been on the CPG Guys yourself. So we had fun chatting with you on that show, ours, Peter Bond and my show. And hopefully what we do today, the most important thing we can do is learn as much as we can from each other, learn from the show, and as well, in that spirit of learning, give back as much as we can as well on the show to others.
I love that. I love that. I think that's the mission and purpose of this thing. So the quick roadmap for this, we're going to talk about Sri's early life, values that he picked up, what things really drove him. Then we'll jump around in your work history, again, focusing on learnings and key decisions that you took. And finally, we'll sort of talk a little bit about your personal lives and other aspirations that you have. So jumping right in, Sri, I'll sort of maybe just start with your early life. Just talk to us about where you grew up and what was the life like for you growing up in Calcutta?
I'm actually born Sri Lankan in Colombo because my mom is from there. My dad is South Indian, but he worked for a British multinational company. We moved around a lot. And when we were kids, we anchored in Calcutta, India, because that's where the Imperial Chemical Industries, the company he worked for, ICI, was anchored out of. And so growing up as a child, that was home. I went to school at La Martiniere for boys, because back then there was a clear distinction, boys and girls schools. Kind of one of those schools where I wore a uniform every day, a tie, a blazer. And there was a huge impetus on discipline, dress, neatness, style, show up every day, trimmed hair. At that time, we detested everything, my friends and I. We hated the fact that every morning at 8 o'clock, we'd have assembly and the principal would walk by, Principal Olney, I even remember his name. That was my entire duration at La Martiniere. And if you get plus or minus points, depending on whether our shoes were polished or whether the tie was, tied all the way to the top of the neck. And if the buttons on your hands were actually buttoned or not. Hated it, absolutely. And if your hair was longer than your collar, you'd actually have a barber come to school, and the guys who didn't have their hair trim, we'd get their hair trim. I think back now though, Guru, the virtues that that school gave me at a young age, like from age 5 to graduating from high school at age 18 or 19, 18, probably 17, 18, that created an aura of discipline in life to not take things for granted and be the best at whatever you do. Aim to be the best at what you do. And if you can't be, that's okay. Move on to the next thing. Discover what you can really hone down at, be the best at, and really fine tune it all the way down to the bone. I also remember growing up in Calcutta where mom would take us to Flurys. Those of you that don't know what Flurys is, Google it, Flurys. It's one of the oldest long-standing British traditional breakfast pastry shops, which became like a sit-down restaurant, and today still thrives very much in that old British culture. I was with my mom for her 75th birthday in 2019. Thank God, before the pandemic, we were able to go celebrate it. Always make it a point when I go to Calcutta, Guru, to go to Flurys, sit down and have the corn on toast.
Got it.
Grew up with 2 brothers. One 2 years older, he actually works for Mondel as their head of field sales up in Canada. So we discuss, when my older brother and me talk, everyone else in the room gets bored because we're discussing the CPG industry, branding and retail. How about that? My younger brother eventually ended up in Wall Street. He's down in New Jersey, in Edgewater. And he's one of the managing directors there in Wall Street. So for one of the banks. So that constitutes the family. And, the last 18 months, needless to say, Guru, I'm sure you feel the same way, have been tough because we haven't been able to see mom in India. Can't come here, can't go there, too much fear of the pandemic, things of that nature. But all the memories from school, Guru, all I can tell you is the one that stands out in my mind the most is getting discipline very early in life. Besides all the social friends we made, the actual education, that discipline culture, my kids tell me, hasn't left me even today. And these days, I work West Coast because I just recently moved from New York to California. I live in Los Angeles County now. And so I work Central Time, which means my day starts at 6 a.m. every day. I don't know if I didn't have that gift of discipline early in life, whether I could really adhere to a 6 a.m. start. But fortunately, somebody imparted that gift early in life. Let me ask you that question back, Guru, in the spirit of our dialogue, right? Where did you go to school? I've always been curious to know that, and we didn't ask you that on the podcast.
It's very kind of you. No, very similar. I actually grew up in a Catholic school, and kind of very similar in terms of you have to be buttoned up, you have to be disciplined. There's like shoes have to be exactly that black and polished. You have to almost see your face as a reflection. Apart from discipline, also it really, I think for me, it was really the very core of education. I think the importance of education was really drilled in deep, both in my school and in my childhood. So I think that was I really look back and thank, because a lot of the foundations on what we do is because of the education that they were able to get. And I've looked back at the successes that at least myself and my family have had is really because of the educational underpinning. That's something that nobody can take away from us. So that's you
can't undermine that. The importance of that at that age was extremely important. And I think you and I have just unlocked a mystery now for your listeners, which is a lot of people probably ask you, like they ask me, how come your English is so good and how did you learn English, etc. For you and me, it was practically first language growing up. You went to a Catholic school, I went to a French Catholic school, La Martiniere for boys. English was our first language. It's like hard for some people to accept that in this country, but it was. There's nothing you and I can do about it. That's what we talk to mom and dad, our siblings, our friends. That's how we grew up.
And Sri, this story is about you. So I'm going to deflect a lot of your questions to me respectfully back to you, because we are curious about you today.
Sure.
So one of the things which I'm finding very fascinating, I'm almost seeing that you are a double immigrant. You immigrated from Colombo, or your parents did, and settled in a foreign country. And then again, you've immigrated, you've again moved to a quote unquote foreign country, you've now naturalized over here. Oftentimes immigrants, when we talk to each other, we take that struggle for granted, like assimilating, being a part of another culture. It's very tough on one's heart when you're going through and really almost questioning every single way of life, leave alone the financial and other struggles that you go through. Talk to us a little bit about from the heart on how you've been able to sort of assimilate yourself in, and you've done it 2 times now. Looks like successfully.
I'll tell you something, Guru. We already discussed English language, right? Like I feel you and I have a leg up on many other immigrants because we're blessed with the gift of, I don't know whether it's a blessing, but either way, English is like enough forte. So that definitely helps assimilate, and because we can articulate so much better than somebody who's still learning the English language, right? But that said, I don't feel like I'm an immigrant. I've never felt like one other than my early days. By the way, how did I end up in the United States and why do I live in Los Angeles today? Let's unpack that a little bit.
Love it.
To kind of explain that journey of that hardship and what happens, right? So I came way back in 1994. So it's been 27 long years to go to school at Virginia Tech, my alma mater, big Hokie football fan. I made the dream of going back on field and actually getting signed autographs by Coach Beamer and the defensive coordinator, Bud Foster, who's like mega popular for those of you who follow football, meeting
Nice.
Jaron Mosley, cornerback for the Giants, that kind of stuff. But I'm really into Virginia Tech football. I'm active alum. So, when I met my wife, Kavita, there, she was 1 year junior to me. She came here in 1995, decided to ask her out, and then magic and chemistry happened. We got married in 1997. Ria was born 3 years later. Lara was born another 5 years later. But to me, I'll tell you, those were the tough periods of life, right? I even remember, for example, when Ria was born, my wife went back to work. It was very hard. It wasn't working out. We couldn't find a babysitter. We're back in year 2000, we're in a completely different atmosphere as we are today, where you have daycare centers like every corner of the street now. So my wife had to quit her job. I was still on what's known as an H-1B visa. My wife had to go back to India because there was no status for her. And because she was already working on an H-1 and she had to get converted to an H-2 visa. Like I'm giving a lot of technicalities now, but I am speaking straight from the heart as you asked me to. But what ended up happening as a result, Guru, was when she left her job in September 2000, she had to go back with my newborn daughter from April to India. And because of the visa situation, I couldn't see my newborn daughter till February of 2001. That's like 5 months out of a child that was only 10 months old. That's half her life. I couldn't see her. And one of the greatest moments, I remember landing in Chennai airport to go, once the visa situations got sorted out, to bring him back to the US. I remember distinctly, I walked down from the plane with a fear. Will my 10-month-old child even want to come to me? Because she hasn't seen me for 5 months. It's been grandparents and other cousins, etc. And the first thing she did when she saw me was she wanted to be on my shoulder. And that was like an epic moment of life. I distinctly remember, the joy that children bring in life is unparalleled. Now, of course, she's 22. We're in a different ball game, but that joy hasn't changed even a tiny bit. So speaking of hardship, most people don't understand what this visa journey is, right? And this visa is all about being qualified for the role, going through the motions and getting your green card, your citizenship. I've gone through the entire process and actually know it pretty well. And you're right, we take it for granted. Like, hey, it just happens. It doesn't just happen. Behind all of that, there's a lot of hard work. Attorneys are in play, companies are in play, brands are in play, you are in play, your family is in play, and there are disappointments along the way. The process takes forever. Of course, we're in different times today where I think the process takes even longer and takes, I don't even want to say forever. It's like the word is forever these days from what I hear. But yeah, we take those things for granted. In between all that, Guru, I've also moved places. I landed first in Virginia. Then I eventually made my way to Northern Virginia, then to Jersey. And, I'll share transparently with you, I was recruited off campus by IRI, Market Research Company. And it's competitive Nielsen's. There's really only 2 giant market research firms in our CPG industry. And I got a role to work in Norwalk, Connecticut. So you go past New York State, you enter Connecticut about 15 exits in, 15 miles in, often off the Connecticut Turnpike. And so I was coming straight out of school at Virginia Tech, where I was paying $94 rent with three other roommates, collectively $400. And when I went to Norwalk, I interviewed, I got the role with IRI. I started looking for apartments in the vicinity in Stamford, which is like a nicer place to live back then in the days, 10 miles south, that kind of thing, easy commute, 20-minute commute. And it was a sticker shock to me that I had to pay a month and a half security deposit, and the starting price even back then of a one-bedroom apartment, $1,500. Welcome to the Northeast. And I didn't have 2 months security deposit, not really having a social security history back then or a credit history, $3,000 to put down. My brother, who was working for Citibank at that time, living in New Brunswick, New Jersey, says to me, why don't you shack up with me? But you're going to have to figure out how to commute 82 miles each way to work.
Wow.
And I'm talking 82 miles of the harshest freeways in America, the New Jersey Turnpike, I-95 to the George Washington Bridge, New York State Thruway, and the Connecticut Turnpike. And of course, along the way back then, my round trip tolls were $10.10. Some of these things you don't forget, man. And I knew as a result, to go back home, to go back home and get to work every day, I'd leave the house at 6:15 every morning, and I'd exit work by 5:30. And there's no way to avoid traffic at that time. I knew every exit on the turnpike on I-95. And so when the days of GPS came, I never needed them because I just know the Northeast like inside out from back in that training. But you spoke of how difficult it is, right? That's how life started. And when you've started life that way, you learn to appreciate all the gifts life gives you. I actually drove 164 miles every day, round trip for work on my first job. And then I remember working at PepsiCo for IRI. I eventually got a role. And the reason I got a role at PepsiCo is I actually raised my hand to take on a role nobody wanted to take on, which was to actually work on site in Somers, New York, 30-mile commute from Stamford. And a lot of people didn't want to go work remotely, even though there was a local team there. They were all living within a close vicinity. And that eventually resulted in me being tapped to work for PepsiCo. And I'm 100% sure I can tell you when I look back, Guru, if I didn't raise my hand to do the 60-mile round trip to go work on site at PepsiCo, I wouldn't be where I am today because I got training in the PepsiCo family, Frito and PepsiCo, which I still believe is really industrial and one of the best you can get in the industry when it comes to CPG and retail. So talk about, as immigrants, you refer to the word hardship. We just do it, man. I can't explain why. Like maybe it's one of the greatest analogies I can tell you, adversity, right? When I hear people around me complain of adversity, change management. Think about what you and I have done, right? We left countries where we grew up till we were 19, 20, got 21, 22, whatever it is, got mollycoddled by our parents. And I'll say mollycoddled, that's exactly what happened. And we moved 5.
Sri, are you there? Sri, are you there? Sri. I don't know what happened. You got dropped.
No idea what happened, but I don't know where you lost me.
No, I think it's fine. We'll edit it. We'll edit it at the right place where we are.
Let me just wrap up if you don't mind. Let me just wrap up that segment, right? You know, I'm going to sum everything I said to you about change in one shot, right? We often get asked on the job as immigrants, like change management. It's hard, difficult to do. How do we do it, right? Think about it for a second, man. We migrated 5,000 miles from mollycoddled environments. We didn't know the banking system. We didn't have a social circle. Heck, we didn't even know how to apply, how to go work on a computer to choose courses and make sure we don't mess it up. And we figured it out. We made social circles. We bought homes. We bought cars. We got jobs. Life moved on. So immigrants, change making is in our blood, whether we want to accept it or not. When you moved those 5,000 miles and restarted your life, go figure.
Yeah, I think that's very well summed up, Sri. You know, oftentimes when I'm bringing my kid up, I have one child and I'm bringing him up, I oftentimes think, what are the values that he doesn't get to automatically pick up because he's born in this country with a lot of privileges, and oftentimes end up being intentful about teaching. I think the things which you go back and talked about really are the core, like importance of hard work, importance of staying hungry. We call it curiosity and learning, but actually, if you push it, it's being paranoid, what Andy Grove says. And finally, having confidence in yourself. And I think we all were fortunate in that we had nothing to lose and grew up in a way that what Richard Branson would say, screw it, let's do it, right? And we have nothing much to lose. But I think I oftentimes wonder if we could take those risks if we didn't go through all this. But really good learnings there. And I wanted to actually put a pin to the PepsiCo thing where you raised your hand. But before we get there, I wanted to actually first also unpack some of your early life story in terms of the struggles that you went through and how you and what you learned of that. In another podcast I did, I learned that you actually had a pretty intense early life, like, you know, from driving a truck to washing dishes and things like that. Like, I'm sorry if I'm putting you in sort of areas that is not pleasant, but can you talk to me about some of the learnings that you had with sort of taking some of those humble jobs?
By the way, you're not putting me in any uncomfortable spot because it actually happened in my life. So might as well share it transparently. So when I got to school here, right, I had to pay the fees. My dad was able to spot me, I think, one semester fees and the one-way ticket. So you got to figure out life after that. Somebody's got to pay those fees. Education doesn't come free, as you know, right? And I didn't get you on a scholarship. I eventually hacked my way to a scholarship. I became the computer lab monitor for Virginia Tech for the School of Business back in 1994 when it was still a PC 286 and we had the dot matrix. We had the dot matrix printers, which is not going to make any sense to half the listeners on the show, but it might be fun Googling what a dot matrix printer is and a PC 286, those floppy disk things where DOS was in one. I eventually did end up getting the scholarship, but in the meantime, you got to make money, man, to pay the bills. And I found that working in the food court was the fastest way. And, you know, again, I refer to coming out of a mollycoddle life until you're age 19, whatever it is, got to the food court, said, hey, they were recruiting for jobs. I was able to get the job. And day one, my supervisor gave me a broom and said, clean the bathroom. Here you come from India, mollycoddle, forget clean the bathroom. You haven't cleaned anything in your life. Dishes, you've never cooked. You got to figure all this stuff out, right? It was pretty humbling, but it stayed with me for life. Absolutely, it stayed with me for life. I won't hesitate to do any of these things today. One summer, I drove a truck to help the library relocate. And little known secret, the guys actually took pity on me because I looked small and skinny compared to them. That's what they said to me. They said, you drive, we'll do the heavy lifting. So what I would do is I would get hours, like 8 hours of trucking. Back then it paid pretty well. $12 an hour back in 1994 was a lot of money, but I get to sit on the driver's seat, just drive 20 miles each way and then study for 4 or 5 hours at a time while the others did the hard work of lifting. But they didn't have CDLs, and I figured if you could get a CDL, you could make more money and you could do it with slightly less stress in your life as well. So I've done that. I've been a bus boy, you know, eventually found my way to the getting a scholarship and got out of those things. But hey, figure it out, man. That's what it takes. And I think you referred to, sometimes I too reflect on the children. Are they truly understanding how this equation works and how the 360, everything is a 360. It has to fit in the jigsaw puzzle. And I do wonder sometimes, do they have the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle right?
No, you're absolutely right. And are we being good parents and being intentful about giving those right types of educations? But that's an incredible story. I think the tenacity that you must have picked up looks like that really went far in just figuring it out, whatever it may be.
I'm still telling you, Guru, when I get asked a question about change management and can you adapt, I've changed roles 5 times in life now in corporate careers, from IRI to PepsiCo to J&J to Revlon to where I am today, right? And each time during interview cycles, people ask me, how are you at change management? I just think to myself, if you are an immigrant and you are where you are today, you've kind of demonstrated the highest level of change management by moving 5,000 miles, right? Like, why even go down that path?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It just seems trivial when you compare to those type of experiences that you've gone through.
Yeah.
Due to the strength, the confidence, and the optimism.
The other thing I wanted to mention, with change management, which these days in the industry, if you ask me, what is the number one thing that keeps you up at night? Number one thing that's opportunity in the industry, CPG industry, retail, change is the number one opportunity. Those that can adapt to the supply chain headwinds we have in our industry, the labor force shortages, all of these resulting in significant commodity price increases that the whole industry is talking of. And those that are resilient can understand change, decompose change, and also understand that when change is required, you have to step up to the plate. And those are the ones that are going to be resilient in the long run and be the winners in the long run.
That's very well said. I want to go to your experience that you talked about in Pepsi, where you actually raised your hand, you said, for a role that not many people wanted. Can you unravel that? Like, what was that key decision point, or how did you evaluate that opportunity that you got?
So pretty simple, right? I was on a visa back then. I didn't actually put oodles of thinking into it, contrary to popular belief. These days, it's a different story before I take on anything. On a visa, you have limited choice. And when many people didn't want to take on an unpopular role of actually driving 60 miles round trip every day, Monday through Friday, and it was for supporting, if I remember accurately, the infrastructure for using IRI Analyzer 1.0. I'm really dating myself. Not the coolest job, not a ton of learning, etc. But I figured if I raise my hand and I got to work on, even then, before Pepsi became this 70 billion behemoth giant it is back then, it was the 40 billion behemoth giant. It was probably right before the Quaker Tropicana, the Quaker acquisition. It was a brand that I was always in love with and awe as a child. I remember collecting all the little bottle caps in India with cricket players as names and, trying to get into every marketing campaign that was there to redeem rewards and things. The Pepsi fascinated me. And the chance to get associated with such a large brand of that magnitude and scale, I raised my hand and said, if others don't want it, that's fine. Maybe they're used to it. It's nothing great for them. It was a big deal for me. And I raised my hand, and sure enough, I got it. And it was a game-changing moment for me, because working for IRI, I got to interact with who's who at PepsiCo. One of the roles I got in the process was to be on the 9th floor with Senior and Somers. I sat next to the senior most executives of Pepsi-Cola North America. And many of those people that I trained on IRI eventually became executives at PepsiCo. I can name many of them, but I won't embarrass them. I remember literally being there day one on the job as a junior category manager, sitting side by side and us discussing what share meant. And little did I know, 27 years later, one of the most important metrics for me would be volume growth and everything that I train people on. So I got this grounding, deep grounding in data right there on day one as well, on the first job I ever had.
Very cool. So actually, if I take a step back, Sri, and this reminds me, one of the one of the things a previous leader on our podcast, Cal Raman, talked about how life is not fair, year to year, minute by minute basis. But overall, if you look at life, it's fair to you. You get what you deserve.
Well said.
And when I look at your story, it's where maybe life wasn't fair in the beginning for portions of your life, and you're now making it up. Life's making it up now, if I may. I think what I'm curious is, it wasn't the best of like schools or best of education upbringing or whatever. By the way, the same story is mine as well, that you went through, but you still now, if I look at it, you're a C-level executive at a top 100 CPG. What decisions do you think you made in your life, and what are the core sort of hacks? I know it's not easy, but still I'm going to ask that question. What are those things when you look back and said, what are seminal moments which actually got me to what I am today?
The number one thing I'm going to share a framework with your listeners, if it's okay. It's the word learn, LEARN, but it's each one of those 5 letters, LEARN, stand for an acronym. Before I get there, I'll share a statement made to be what I would call my first career life mentor. It was at IRI. I owe this guy a lot. I'll just say it publicly. His name is Mahinder Matrani. Recently, I haven't talked to him in a few years, but he said to me, you got to learn to play with the deck the dealer dealt you. And sometimes, if you've ever been at a blackjack table, I had to learn what that is because I don't gamble and it's not my thing. And I had to learn what that means, but I understand the analogy pretty deeply and it's stuck with me. In life, you're going to have some positives, you're going to have some negatives, but the environment around you largely dictates where you're going to end up and how things are going to work out for you. And the question is, do you adapt to that environment? Do you learn in that environment? What value can you bring to that environment? Are you showing empathy for that environment? And can you be natural? Can you be you in that environment? Along the way, do you stop and smell the roses? That was a big message I took away from what Mahinder said to me. By the way, he works in Indiana for, I believe, Symphony Technologies, but he really coached me a lot. That was my first mentor. I've had amazing bosses along the way. David Pottist, Johnson & Johnson. He taught me a lot. Kevin Vivian from Frito. I was yanked out from IT and put into sales at Frito. Day 2, he put me in front of a customer on the job. Day 2 to present. Wow. I think it was Myers C-Stores. And I had to tell the story of why Frito's immediate consumption impulse business would actually work for Meyer. Day 2. Now, I can say I was scared as heck. I didn't know what I was doing. I had to learn and adapt. I had 48 hours. Kevin said, you're doing it. You are a guy. You run strategy for dollar, drug, and convenience. Better get over here and do the job, man. And but I got to admire his guts, right? That's a pretty big business for Frito. It's probably back then, $100 million business. Of course, in Frito's 10 billion equation, 1%, but still $100 million business with a pretty decent margin, probably. And that taught me the lesson also to be courageous. But I came out of that meeting and said, Kevin, thank you. I think I aced it based on what the customer said to me. And Kevin said, I knew you had it in you. I just had to push you over the edge. You were already waiting at the corner yourself, and I just had to push you into accepting it and going and actually doing it. And I've had great mentors along the way, but I want to decompose. I just said 5 words to you, hidden those who are listening carefully. Those 5 words actually add up to the word learn. L stands for the actual word learn. Learn the environment around you, study it. I'll tell you my secrets of studying. I'm actually not a great book reader, and whoever wants to send me hate mail because I don't read books, it's okay. I've found the greatest learning tool these days is listening to podcasts. You can multitask and be ambidextrous while listening to a podcast, and I do that a lot. The other learning tool I have is reading articles. I read articles like crazy. And the best place I find articles, and I keep it contextual, is actually LinkedIn. And so when I say I don't read books, I read articles. I don't want to say I don't read, I do. But podcasts has helped me. So I want to learn and I have a deep, keen sense, and I encourage everybody, when you go to a new environment, like I just came to my new employer 6 or 7 months ago, the first thing I wanted to do is understand every single brand. What's the DNA of the brand? What's the segmentation model? Which consumer does it appeal to? Doesn't it appeal to? What's the history of the last 3 years? Which retailers is it doing well at? What's the margin equation? What is the advertising plan? And then what's the role of e-commerce, given these days that a majority of consumer communications happen through digital? I'm very hungry to learn. So that's the first word, L. But it needs to be contextual in the environment you're in. Back to what you said, you got to learn to play with the deck the dealer gave you. The second one is empathy. What that empathy is, when you come into an environment, you have to respect those that are there in the environment. Not everybody's going to like you. You are not going to get along with everybody. Neither is everybody there to please you, but neither are you there to please everybody. But you're there to do the greater good for the environment you're in. I'll repeat that again. To do greater good for the environment then. So collectively, you want to lift the environment up, and you have to understand your role in that. The only way you can do that is showing empathy. Two people requesting empathy back in the process, and also empowering people via empathy to do the right thing 100% of the time. So that's the second word. So L is learn, E is empathy. The third one we've spoken about quite a bit, Guru, it's adapt. Adapt is, once you learn, you get empathy and you show empathy, adapt into the environment you're in. So back to the analogy, learn to play with the deck the dealer gave you. Know who's around you, who else is playing, who else is here to win, who else is here just to show up at the table. That's the best analogy you can give you. Adapt to the actual environment, make friends with the dealer if you have to, and be patient along the process. The wins are not going to come on day one, but they will come if you're patient, you're resilient, you're willing to learn, and you're willing to adapt. And you're also willing to show empathy along the way. So that's the third word, adapt. The fourth word is, I call it rest. That is work-life balance. This career is a marathon. Most people these days, I don't feel, treat the career as a marathon. When I was younger, neither did I. I had goals for myself. I wanted to be a VP by 40, SVP by 45. I have a leaderboard sitting somewhere in storage that probably identifies that on a piece of paper that says I have to be blah by this age, that age, everything of that nature. But I learned as I grew up and matured along the career journey that it is a marathon. And you need to have little sprints. Even in a marathon, you'll notice when someone runs 26 miles, they run tiny sprints. They don't run long sprints. They run 500 meters as a sprint and then jog again, and another 500 meters well down the pipeline. Those are your career boosts, your promotions along the way, the salary increases you get along the way. But be patient. I learned that patience comes best when you have work-life balance and you don't go crazy about career is the only thing on planet Earth. You're surrounded by amazing people, whether they're at work, whether it's your family, whether it's your partner, whether it's your pets. Learn to smell the roses around you. Find ways to be meaningful to all of them, and find ways that in turn, they will automatically be meaningful back to you. When we're 75 years, you know what people will remember? Our kids, our spouses, our partners, and our pets too will remember us for the love we showed them. You and I are not going to remember how many displays we sold to who. I assure you of that. So stop and smell the roses. You have to adapt and sell displays at that point, but stop and smell the roses. That's what I call rest. And lastly is N in the learn. That is be yourself. Be natural. Don't try to be somebody else. If you have certain skill sets and you have certain convictions, learn and adapt. But if you have strong convictions, trust your instincts. Odds are you are right. But use learning to improve those instincts. That's what I call the word learn.
I love that. I love that framework. I think it's there's so much to unpack over there. Yeah, I think Sri, I turned 40 a couple of years ago and have had like a lot of introspection. I've gone through a lot of introspection over the last 2 years. One of the things that has really struck me was that life's not a race, right? As you said, like VP by X and SVP by Y and things like that. What's at the end of the race? Life is a race, and what's the end of a life? It's death. Are you really racing towards a death, or are you?
My gosh, so well articulated by you. So, and I'm reflect back on your own life, Guru. I'm going to bet my bottom dollar now that if you cycle back to when you were, whatever age you came to this country, 19, 20, 21, whatever it was, right, to go to university, you would have never said, I'm going to be CEO of Commerce IQ, but look where you are today. Patience, resilience, learning, adapting, empathy, finding balance, all of those have come into the mix. That's why you're running Commerce IQ today.
No, I think it's, as I was going to give a stamp to this podcast saying life gives you a deck, deal with it. But I think a better stamp to this is learn to smell the roses. I love that better. You asked me a question as we were rolling into this saying, Guru, why are you doing this? And it's sort of, why are you doing Commerce IQ? What's your long-term vision and all this? I want to go back to what we just summarized the last podcast with, that you said, learn to smell the roses. And frankly, I want to be vulnerable here, Sri, which is I've been going through a lot of personal figuring out the why behind Guru. Like what is it that gets me going? What is it that I really want to accomplish in my life, leave alone professional life, but really my life? And I feel vulnerable in saying, I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. But I know that there is an ignorance over there on what I'm trying to accomplish and what I'm trying to leave the world with. However, I do know that the why for Commerce IQ has been nailed down. We want to be the operating system for for any brand in the world, and we're really passionate about it. We're going behind that. But to talk about personal side of things, frankly, I'm still going through that journey about figuring out my why. And I don't know if it is directly going into the company's why. So going through that journey, I don't know if you sort of have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, what you're saying actually makes a lot of sense, right? The answer to the personal why, to be very transparent and to be equally vulnerable as you just said, I don't think most people on planet Earth will get that answer. It's you live through the motions. And then if you look at this as I don't want to get philosophical here, but if you look at it as a much more giant macro picture, right? What's our role on planet Earth? There's about 8 billion of us, give or take, whatever the numbers are these days, it's growing. And then you think about, you're in a solar system, you're in a universe, there are millions of universe. Space there's no continuum, right? Are we the only planet that as humans is 8 billion, the number, and we're one of 8 billion? In theory, if you're one of 8 billion, do you even matter? So we could really get philosophical about this, but my why is at least starting to emerge. The older I get, the more experiences, I would call it, it's not even older, it's like experiences I've had. I moved cross country, moved nations, met hundreds and thousands of people. Some I call friends, some I call, my colleagues, some I call acquaintances, some I meet on a podcast that I run every single day. My why is starting to emerge. It may not be someone else's why and what may make someone else happy, but I've realized life is a marathon. You can have desires. I think desires motivate people. Desires could be a variety of, a desire could be as simple as I want to buy a $50 watch. I had that desire when I first came to the United States. It could be as complicated as I need a showroom of Lamborghinis, or it could be something completely different. That could be learning and education. But for me, my why that's emerging is, if I can make an impact and uplift hundreds and thousands of people, I feel I accomplished something in the day. And that's why Guru, Peter, and I started the CPG guys. We feel we can spread knowledge of this transformation in the consumer packaged goods industry. We can take thousands of people with us on the journey and have brands and retailers join us on that journey of transformation and deliver for the consumer. I call that impact of scale. Getting into e-commerce for 5 odd years changed my life and my career destiny completely. Perhaps it'll do that for a bunch of people too. Those that are in e-commerce land usually don't come with the in-store experiences. Their careers tend to peak out as VP of e-com, director of e-com, depending on the brands and retail that they represent. I'm living proof that if you stay at it, you run you treat your career as a marathon, and you're tenacious at it, you're willing to learn, adapt, you can build your journey and then hopefully take hundreds and thousands of people in the process as well. That why it's starting to get clearer to me day by day by day, that Individual successes are great. They give you a sense of accomplishment. The greatest individual successes are someone sitting across from the table. They're able to attribute their success to things you did for them. Even better.
That's very powerful, Sri. And so I want to pick on a couple of things that you said. One is you are starting to realize your why, and you're starting to get motivated intrinsically about community, about knowledge, about giving back in that way. And you started this wonderful series called CPG Guys, where you're imparting that. I have two questions over there. One is, how does one think about, and how did you arrive at this conclusion that, gosh, like I have a work why and I have a personal why, and maybe now you're starting to, does it not get complicated when you have almost like two jobs where you're chasing two whys, one at work and one with the CPG Guys podcast you're doing? At the end of the day, you have a limited time. How are you thinking about separating those out, or are they towards the same?
They are coming together. And I'll tell you how. It's not that CPG Guys and my day job are coming together. It's the why is coming together. You know, I approach my job every day, my day job every day, as the why is my number one goal. You know, many people can deliver the results for any brand. Many people can deliver the results for a retail. And the history is proof in the pudding, which is if you look at the 50-year history of any brand, there have been many sales leaders like me. For any brand, we come, we go, we do our best during our tenure, we deliver the results. Some deliver more, some deliver less. This is true in retail as well. And it's not radically different, right? You look at even leadership of companies, it's no different. People come and go. It's just who stays 10 years, who stays 2 years, who stays 6 months. So that stuff is pretty clear. Delivering results is par for the course. But my why, even at my day job, is very clear, Guru. The more people I can manage from a talent perspective, I can uplift, build their careers, make them feel safe, comfortable, diversity and inclusion. You know, being in the PepsiCo Asian network and helping launch it at PepsiCo scale, and being the chair for the network at the senior level for 7 years, game changer. I learned a lot about people, their motivations, their aspirations. Diversity is another huge journey for me personally. You know, it's a little known story that I have 2 awards from the California Legislative Assembly for my work done towards advancing Asian representation in corporate America. But to me at this stage, those whys are coming together. Like everything I do in my day job, it's about humans, people. Can I uplift them? Can I give them a voice? Can I build their career for them? Can they aspire to replace me, go on to better things? Will one of them end up hiring me someday? That'll be the greatest achievement. If one of them calls me 5 years from now and says, come be my blah, I know I did the right thing and I uplifted somebody. The whys are definitely starting to get a whole lot clearer to me. We're here on planet Earth, so we can uplift and do the greater good for society, the community, for our consumers, people around us. That's the sound. There is no joy greater than that.
That's amazing, Sri. So that actually really explains to me how you're able to find that motivation and the time and the energy to do both of these things and do it really well, because the whys are coming together and it's really motivating. And most importantly, these are going towards your intrinsic motivation. It's not like like something else that you're chasing, but really like it really gives you true
personal satisfaction, Guru. When you get personal satisfaction, you'll run the marathon. When you're looking for short-term rewards like financial, you'll run sprints. I'm running a marathon on people and transformation.
That's very well said, Sri. Yeah, and I also want to maybe you opened up a whole different topic here with diversity and inclusion. I'll also again confess, until about say a couple of years ago, I used to very proudly say that I'm colorblind, meaning if I have 5 resumes in front of me, I would and 5 people I'm talking to, I would interview them based on merit. One of my very close friends, who's a CEO of a Series B company now, doing really well, talked to me about his journey, how it was so hard to raise money in the Valley, frankly, unfortunately, because of the color of his skin. And it just opened up this entire concept that, gosh, like you cannot be colorblind, because the opportunities that are being given to colored people are actually much lower. So you will not see those in the resume when you're sifting through the resume. So you got to like have that. You cannot be colorblind when you're sort of when you're going out, and especially as leaders, giving opportunities to emerging folks and hiring people and stuff like that. So personally, I've gone through a lot of learning over there, and I still think it's day one, and so for me to learn that. But I'm very curious about, you talked about a couple of awards, but what's the story behind those?
Yeah, so very simple, right? Again, if you can make an impact for the larger good of people in a larger number, it's much more self-fulfilling than any other individual impact will ever deliver. And your purpose starts to blossom, right? That's what happened on the PepsiCo Asian Network. I was surrounded by good Asian leaders who really wanted me to also be in the mix, I was a little bit more senior to others. That helped because I had a voice and a megaphone. I tell people even today in the diversity journey, if I have a voice and a megaphone, use me productively. I'll make my own choices at the end of the day, what I want to communicate and I don't. Because this is a marathon. I've been running this marathon for quite some time now. And I've gotten some experiences in the process. But to be very fair, Guru, at the end of the day, talent's always going to win because you have to deliver results. I have to, people around us have to, and we want to make sure those that we pick to do roles can also be empowered and can be successful in the jobs that they do. But there wouldn't be diversity groups in corporate America, and we wouldn't be talking at a macro scale in the various industries we all represent if it didn't require attention. It's a question I ask myself every single time as we place candidates. We bring people on the show at CPG, guys. We know female representation in corporate America, in society, is still underserved. The data is all around us. You hear people scream this stuff every single day, right? So Peter and I do, October became Women's Month last year. We only interviewed, and on the CPG guys, only had female leaders. And then we started connecting it to performance with purpose, a word I really internalized from Indra, who was our CEO at PepsiCo back when I was working in the 2000s. Early 2000s. And we started donating to Susan G. Komen. Last year, we were able to raise 8K. This year, 20K. Eventually, next year, we'll shoot for 50. This thing will get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the way we do it is we've even found a corporate partnership to be able to do it with a financial institution to multiply the dollars that we are able to bring in. So to me, the whole role that diversity plays is the more diverse your experiences are, it's no different than life, right? We talked so much on this podcast about came from that country, moved to 7 places. Like I'm one of those few, I think, that have had the opportunity now to go experience the South in Texas, now the Southwest in California. And by the way, they don't overlap. And extreme Northeast in Manhattan in New York City. Like I've seen all 3 aspects. They just make me a richer person. When the person across the table passes a judgment on something and says an opinion on something, I don't judge them as bad, good. I think of it as maybe they don't have the same experience as me. They haven't seen something else that I have. But I'm not going to jump to a conclusion and judge them based on a comment, a sentiment that they bear, without thinking through, my gosh, I've actually lived in Texas. I know what the ancestry is because I was surrounded by like-minded people. And that's what causes someone to say it. Same thing Manhattan, same thing now California, right? And to me, and then think of the consumers we serve. Our consumers, your consumer, your clients, they're a diverse mix of people. My consumers, they're a diverse mix of people. The podcast and the listeners are a diverse mix of people. We want to serve the community that consumes everything we do. And so you have to surround yourself with people who look and feel like them so that you can also be influenced as you build things. You put solutions in the marketplace. You're also building for everybody, not just for one group and one cohort. This is why diversity and inclusion is a must. What usually happens on the D&I journey, Guru, which needs to change, is the focus comes on the diversity aspect very heavily and very little on the inclusive aspect. So what do I mean by that, right? My own personal experiences over being a diversity leader over 17 years now, since 2004, is we focus on the numbers, representation, and we call it diversity and inclusion at a macro scale in the country. You need numbers. Without numbers, you can't move the needle. So don't get me wrong. Like if you aren't measuring on a scorecard, you and I both know you have investors. I deliver results. If you ain't measuring it, you're not getting it done. But so the scorecard is important, but the inclusivity part is equally important. Like everyone's opinion in the room counts, not just people who are people of color. I'm a person of color, but those that are perhaps not in the POC community, their opinion counts too. Inclusion is truly how do you take all the perspectives, put it in the mix, and make your decision as a result of taking all those perspectives. And I find most people focus on the diversity part. It's a miss on the inclusion part, but these two things come together. The more inclusive you become, your own perspectives on life change dramatically.
That's a great summary. That's a great summary. Thanks for that.
I said a lot. I'm sorry. This is like personal life passion at this stage.
No, this is great. It does actually not just complete us as people, but also makes our performance at work better by having different perspectives, as you said. So I love that. So Sri, we are very curious on how did you land the J&J opportunity to lead the e-commerce? That's such a big role. I want to understand, are there some key decisions that you make? What are the learnings that we can take if we were to aspire a role like that?
Very simple, Guru, and this is going to be hard to accept and believe. Flight right back from a meeting with, I can't remember who in the Northeast. Somebody was sitting next to me, chatted me up. We followed up. What started as a casual opportunity, next thing you know, I was at Frito at that point, and I ended up in the Northeast interviewing. The meeting with HR went so well. They called me back immediately, asked me, "Can you stay an extra hour?" I met my hiring manager then, who had my job then, with my today's job, which is the head of all sales, the chief customer officer. And I asked them a question, very simple one, are you going to have me script the story, or are you going to tell me to follow a script? And they gave me a sheet of paper and said, go for it. I knew that's the sort of person I want to work for. And it was a pivotal moment in my career where I was new in e-com. It had been a year and a half. It's been a struggle. In any large organization, if you go back 10 years in history, e-commerce was like less than 0.5% of business. That too back then in food and bev, from the environment I came from, DST, PepsiCo, less relevant, right? It was a big moment. It was beauty and skin. I knew for my own personal learning and self-development, it would be the right thing to do. I could just run the race with PepsiCo. I'm sure I'd have gotten moved around, and my career, a lot of career needs would have been fulfilled. But it was a learning opportunity for me. And honestly, if I look back, if I hadn't made the bold move to come back, Texas was very comfortable. That's where we wanted to be. We thought we bought a retirement home. But if I didn't make the jump to Skillman, New Jersey, I'm not so sure I'd be where I am today. I'm not so sure this CPG Guys podcast would exist either. And it was curiosity. It was a learning moment. And I'll be honest and say, people work for great managers. I knew in 5 minutes into that meeting with my hiring manager, I don't want to embarrass the person and give names, but if they listen to this podcast, they'll know. And I had a great mentor at J&J who really gave me a lot of latitude to perform. My second manager there, David Pottis, who was the chief customer officer, he really worked with me to define the journey in a situation which was largely brick and mortar. And then the other person was Jeff Smith, the chair for consumer.
And Sri, what did they see in you, and how did you carry yourself into that meeting when you were meeting them, when you haven't played this role, and now you're sort of you're interviewing and talking to them about leading e-commerce for one of the top 10 brands in the world? Jeff
and David, I think what was unique about my manager and then his manager, Jeff, was they were curious to learn. And that learning, we used an acronym early on the show. We called it LEARN. L is the first word for a reason, right? And do you know what Jeff does today? Jeff runs a portfolio up in Canada, where he's from, of 20 plus startups. 20 plus startups. I mean, you know Jeff Smith. So Jeff really coached me, guided me. So did David Pottis. And they gave me the opportunity and latitude in that L journey, their curiosity. And they probably felt, I'm guessing, you have to ask them, but they probably felt, in that learning journey, I had a role to play. Like, we found each other and we would do things together, and we would always look how to build, deliver for consumers, do it rapidly, agile, and they gave me the latitude to do that.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And Sri, tell us a little bit about your podcast. I know you just started to describe that, but who should be listening to it? Why and why?
Yeah. So why did the podcast come up? The mission hasn't changed, and that's why I'm going to tell you why. How did the podcast come up? Peter Bond and I have been friends Peter Bond is my co-host, by the way, of the CPG guys. He and I have been friends for 2 decades. We both worked at IRI, first jobs out of school. He came from Stern, I came from Virginia Tech. We met up early, literally day one on the job. So we've stayed friends forever. When I left Revlon, it was a few days before COVID kicked in Manhattan, like a week before. So I called Peter and very casually said to him, hey, do you want to author some white papers together? Let's put out some articles. And so that's what we set out to do. A mission was, we got all this commute time back, both of us, 2 hours, right? Back in our lives. And we tried writing 1 or 2, didn't enjoy it. And then we said, hey, let's record YouTube videos. YouTube is pay to play. You and I are marketers in our heart and in our lives as well. We know YouTube is pay to play. And nobody in this multitasking world, nobody has 40 minutes, 30 minutes to sit and watch a YouTube video unless it's a Netflix movie, which is not YouTube, unless it's like they're looking for relaxation. Yeah. Everything Peter and I was setting to do was education, very different. And so we said, why not try a podcast? Now, remember, Guru, I know nothing about podcasts. Peter knows nothing about podcasts at that stage. So I called my friend, Brian Cantor, now ex-Cantor, now Omnicom. He runs e-com for them, right? Like digital commerce for them. Brian was a great friend. We had known each other. Brian is very provocative, but also one of the greatest thought leaders I've ever met in the CPG industry. And I asked him if he'd do a 4-part series to kick us off. He kicked us off. You know, day one, we started getting an audience, and day one, they're like, oh, cool, they're talking about transformation. Then we asked Brian Sappington from Coca-Cola, who was then leading transformation for Coca-Cola, who was Peter's friend. We asked about 10 friends of ours. I asked you in the process. And I look back now, 150 episodes later, Peter and I did not design the CPG guys to be 500 episodes in, but here we are 150 episodes later. We didn't design this for the audience base we have, but now we get people reaching out to us every day with suggestions on who to bring in, what topics they want to do. The mission, though, Guru, hasn't changed a lick, and we won't change our mission. The mission was industry transformation, knowledge dissemination, learn ourselves. Every guest that comes on the show, I learned 5 things from them. It could be personality, it could be behaviors, it could be actual technology. I know so much more about artificial intelligence. The job that I do every day, I feel people that I'm surrounded by may or may not know it, but I got this unique opportunity. Like, I now understand the applicability of AI in such a deep way that most people that do what I do will never get that opportunity. That's amazing. I know what ML can do, machine learning can do for me, more than most people having my role will ever appreciate it. It's that learning moment I'm getting back. I'm like absorbing like crazy. Media is another world that's fascinating. It's completely transformed itself. But now I understand shoppable moments in media when I talk to Firework Media as an example, in 7 different ways that most will never get the experience to do. Peter and I are learning in the process, but the mission hasn't changed. It's how can we give back knowledge dissemination to the greater CPG and retail community? Who wins at the end of the day, right? And the more knowledge dissemination we can do, the consumer is going to get a better quality product at more value. That is the mission of the CPG industry and the brand. And so hopefully Peter and I, as we do every single episode, we talk to people, that's what we're doing. We're doing knowledge dissemination. But I'll tell you, if I look back March 18th of last year, that's not what Peter and I designed. We just wanted to have some fun. The good news, Guru, we're still having fun.
Oh, that's great. Awesome. On that note, what is one thing that you're looking for, Sri, as the world is opening up? Anything on your bucket list that you're looking to check off?
I haven't taken my younger daughter to Maui. I need to do that for Christmas. I haven't seen my mom in 2 years. I haven't seen my in-laws in 2 years. We're going to have to find a way in the next 6 months. They're a little hesitant to get on a plane and travel from India, given their age and seniority. But we're going to find a way to bridge those 2 things. You go to Maui, get to see all our parents. It's been too long.
Love that. Making deeper.
How about you, Guru? I want to ask you that same question.
So we are also very similar. I think the pandemic has really created a lot of distance in the close connections that you have. So over the next 1 year, I want to create more bridges, get to talk to more people, and especially family whom we haven't met for a while. Frankly, I met my brother and his wife after a while, and I actually burst into tears when I saw him after like a year.
You were in my neck of the woods the one day I wasn't here.
Say again?
You were in my neck of the woods in California, right here in Los Angeles.
I was.
Came down from the Bay Area, and the one day I wasn't here.
No, we've got to make it happen, Sri. No, on that note, it was just a pleasure to have you. We have to learn to play with the decks that the dealer's given you, and most importantly, learn to smell the roses on the way. Thank you so much for being with us, Sri. It was fantastic.
Thank you, Guru. Thank you for having me.
All right, great.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, it would mean so much to us if you could take a moment to share this show on LinkedIn. To learn more how Guru and his team can help optimize and grow your e-commerce business on Amazon and other retailers, visit commerceiq.ai. Thanks for listening.